I work in Chicago. The building itself feels like it breathes sorrow, the cold steel halls echoing footsteps long after the day shift ends. Most people think a morgue is just a place where bodies wait silently, but for me, it is a chamber of voices, whispers from the dead that tell me exactly how they died. The first time it happened, I thought I was losing my mind. Now I know the truth. The dead want to tell their stories, and they do not care if I am ready or not. Tonight was different from all others. The air hung heavy, the usual chill replaced by a suffocating weight that pressed against my skin like an unseen hand. I arrived at the morgue just as the last light outside bled into darkness. The janitor left early, the security guard had gone off duty, and I was alone with the dead. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of the refrigeration units that kept the bodies cold and preserved. I moved between the drawers, each containing a story I knew but had never heard told aloud until moments like this. My job was to prepare the bodies for identification or autopsy, but I was a listener to those who no longer had breath but still demanded to be heard. The first voice came without warning, a man's voice, dry and brittle, like leaves crushed underfoot. He whispered from the drawer, labeled John Marcus, age 34, cause of death, unknown, pending autopsy. The voice was ragged, but urgent. They stabbed me in the alley behind the Blue Note Jazz Club. I tried to run, but my legs gave out. The blood poured like a river, and the world turned dark. I begged for help, but no one came. I died alone in the cold night. I froze. My hand rested on the drawer handle, but I did not open it. The voice faded like a breath leaving a body. I told myself it was a trick of my mind, fatigue or stress, playing games. But deep down I knew it was real. The dead do not lie. As the hours dragged on, I heard more voices, some frantic, others resigned. A woman whispered of a car crash on Lakeshore Drive. A young boy spoke of drowning in the Chicago River after a dare gone wrong. Each story was a thread weaving into the dark fabric of the city's hidden tragedies. Then came a voice that did not whisper, but shouted with rage and fear. It came from a drawer I had not opened before. A man named Elias Crowley, found in an abandoned warehouse near the West Loop. His voice was raw, filled with a fury that chilled me deeper than the morgues. Cold. They did not want me to find out. They wanted me silent like the rest. I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned there was no one. The shadows moved closer, twisting into shapes that did not belong in this world. I slammed the drawer shut, heart pounding, breath ragged. The voices were not just stories, they were warnings, and something in the dark wanted me to stop listening before it was too late. The night was far from over. The cold air bit into my skin as I stood frozen in the middle of the morgue. The voice from Elias Crowley still echoed in my mind, its rage twisting like a storm inside me. I could almost feel his breath, hot and angry, pressing against my neck. I knew I had to open the drawer again, but fear held me back. What had I stumbled into? What dark secrets did the dead want to protect? I moved slowly toward the drawer, each step heavy with dread. My fingers trembled as I pulled the cold metal handle down. Inside lay a man, pale and lifeless, his eyes staring blankly into the ceiling. But it was his voice I heard again, louder this time, almost desperate. They came for me in the dead of night. Shadows with no faces, hands that gripped like iron. I tried to scream, but my voice was stolen before it left my lips. I fought with every ounce of strength, but the darkness swallowed me whole. I was silenced because I knew too much. My heart hammered in my chest. Who were they? What had Elias uncovered that made him a target even after death? The morgue around me seemed to pulse with unseen energy, the walls closing in as whispers crawled like insects beneath my skin. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the room. The temperature dropped sharply, my breath visible in the icy air. A cold hand brushed against my arm, and I spun around, but saw nothing. only the faint hum of the refrigeration units and the stillness of death itself. I needed answers, and I was sure the dead could give them to me. I moved to the next drawer and opened it with a creak that echoed through the empty morgue. The body inside was a young woman named Claire Matthews, found in an alley near Wicker Park. Her voice was soft but laced with sorrow. I was running from something, someone, my heart pounding, my lungs burning. They chased me through the dark streets, their footsteps pounding behind me. I tripped, fell, and I felt the cold steel against my skin. The blade pierced me, and everything went black. I never saw their face. Her words left a chill deeper than the morgue's cold. I realized the dead were not just telling me how they died, they were revealing pieces of a puzzle, a sinister web of violence threading through the city's shadows. I could not ignore their voices. I had to follow them. As I turned away, the air shifted again. A whisper slithered through the silence, colder and crueler than before. "You should not listen. You will join us soon." I swallowed hard, fighting the rising panic. The morgue was no longer just a place of death. It was a battleground between the living and the dead. And I was caught in the middle. The warning hung in the air like a noose tightening around my throat. "You should not listen. You will join us soon." The voice was neither male nor female, but something older, darker, a sound carved from the deepest shadows in the morgue. My heart hammered fiercely, but my legs moved forward against every instinct screaming at me to run. I crossed to the drawer marked Samuel Redding, a man who had died in a suspicious fire in the South Loop. His body was scarred, his face twisted, in a frozen scream. When I opened the drawer, a harsh wind whipped through the morgue as his voice erupted in my mind like flames licking at my skin. They locked me inside that burning building. I screamed, but the smoke stole my voice. The fire spread like hell itself, and I was trapped in the heat, alone and screaming until the darkness took me. They wanted me gone because I had uncovered their secret. Their secret. The phrase echoed in my head with terrifying weight. Something monstrous was hiding beneath the surface of this city, feeding on the innocent, silencing those who knew too much. The dead were the only ones brave enough to speak, but their voices trembled with fear even beyond the grave. A sudden clang shattered the silence, and I whipped around. The morgue door, heavy and steel reinforced, stood ajar, creaking as if pushed by an invisible force. I stepped toward it slowly, the shadows dancing on the walls like demons playing tricks with the light. I stepped into the corridor, the cold sucking the warmth from my body. The hospital was quiet, too quiet. The flickering overhead lights barely pierced the darkness that stretched like a void down the hallway. My breath came in ragged bursts as the whispers began anew. Barely audible, but relentless. Look for the truth beneath the ashes. Find what they hid from the living. The whispers led me back to the body of Elias Crowley. Something had changed. The cold seemed to pool beneath his drawer, spreading like ink across the morgue floor. I felt drawn to him again, compelled by a force I could not resist. I opened the drawer once more. This time, I did not hear just his voice but a chorus, a terrifying symphony of pain, rage, and despair. The faces of the dead around me blurred and twisted, their eyes bleeding sorrow and warning. They had been silenced to keep a secret, buried in fire and blood. My skin prickled as a figure emerged from the darkest corner of the room, tall and indistinct, watching me with eyes that burned like coal. I could not speak or move. Trapped in a nightmare where the dead and the living collided, the figure whispered in a voice like cracking ice, "You were warned. Now you must choose. Listen and be consumed, or leave and forget what you have heard. Leave and forget what you have heard." I swallowed, stepped forward. There was no turning back. The dead had chosen me as their voice, and I would uncover the truth buried beneath the ashes, no matter the cost. The figure's eyes burned deep into my soul, a blaze of endless night that threatened to swallow me whole. I stood frozen, the weight of countless deaths pressing down like a mountain. suffocating yet strangely familiar. The morgue had become a place not of rest but of reckoning, a crossroads where the dead demanded justice and the living faced their darkest fears. I took a shaky breath and whispered back to the shadow, "I will listen. I must know." A cold wind swept through the room as the figure faded, replaced by a deafening silence that felt alive. The bodies around me seemed to pulse beneath their cold skin, whispers rising like a tide threatening to break free. I felt their stories rushing toward me, each one a shard of a larger nightmare waiting to be uncovered. Suddenly, the morgue's old telephone rang, shattering the silence like a gunshot. I reached for it with trembling hands. The voice on the other end was distorted, mechanical, but filled with urgent desperation. "If you want to survive, stop digging into what happened at 2300 South Michigan. They watch, they wait, they kill." The line went dead. My heart raced. The address was familiar, the site of a fire months ago that had killed Samuel, Redding, and 3 others. Ruled accidental despite rumors of foul play. I looked back at the Bowdies, their faces pale and pleading. They wanted me to find the truth, to expose what was buried beneath the ashes and lies. As I gathered my courage, a sudden noise startled me, a faint tapping from the cold storage room. I moved toward the sound, every step echoing louder in the stillness. The door creaked open just enough for me to peer inside. Empty. But then I saw a bloodied scrap of fabric caught on the corner of a freezer door. It was torn and stained, a clue left behind by someone who had been here before me. Someone who had paid the price for seeking the truth. My skin prickled. I was not alone in this hunt. A whisper rose again, urgent and sharp. "They are closer than you think. Trust no one." The morgue felt like a trap, every shadow hiding a secret, every silence a threat. But I had crossed a line. There was no turning back. I had to follow the voices, unravel the web of lies, and confront the darkness lurking in the heart of Chicago. Because if I did not, I might become one of the voices trapped forever in this cold room of death. The scrap of fabric burned in my mind like a brand. Who had been here before me? What had they found and what had silenced them? My hand still trembled as I pocketed the torn cloth, its dampness a grim reminder of blood spilled in shadows. The morgue was no longer just a workplace. It was a battleground where silence meant death and truth was a weapon. I needed answers, and the only place to start was that address. 2300 South Michigan. The site of the fire that had claimed Samuel Redding and 3 others. Official reports said accident, but I knew better. The dead never lied. The next day, the city outside buzzed with life, oblivious to the horrors hidden beneath its surface. I slipped away from the morgue early and took the L train downtown. The sun cast long shadows between the skyscrapers, but at 2300 South Michigan, darkness lingered like a stain. The building was a charred skeleton, blackened walls still cracked and crumbling. The smell of smoke and ash hung heavy in the air. I walked through the rubble, heart pounding, searching for any sign of what had really happened. Near the back entrance, I found a small metal box half buried in debris. Inside were charred papers and a burned photograph of 4 men, faces scratched out except for one Samuel Redding. Behind the photo, a name was scrawled in shaky handwriting, Nathaniel Crane. Suddenly, a cold breeze whipped past me, carrying a whisper so faint I thought I imagined it. "Beware the watcher in the flames." I shivered and turned to leave, but froze when I saw a figure standing across the street. A man in a dark coat, face hidden beneath a hat. He watched me with eyes sharp and calculating. When I blinked, he was gone, vanished like smoke. Back at the morgue that night, the voices returned with renewed urgency. Elias Crowley's rage burned hotter, Claire Matthews' sorrow deeper. They whispered warnings and secrets in voices I barely dared to hear. I lay awake, clutching the scrap of fabric. The darkness outside pressed against the windows like a living thing. Somewhere out there was a truth so dangerous it could kill, and I was now tangled in its deadly web. Sleep had become a stranger as the days bled into restless nights. The faces of the dead haunted my dreams, their voices echoing relentlessly, demanding to be heard. The scrap of fabric weighed heavily in my pocket, like a cursed talisman, a constant reminder of the path I had chosen, one that twisted deeper into darkness. With every step at the morgue, the atmosphere thickened with an unnatural tension. Shadows seemed to gather at the corners of the room, coalescing into shapes that vanished when I tried to focus. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, threading through the cold air like poison. One night, as I was preparing a new body, the silence shattered with a sudden bang. The refrigeration unit sputtered and died, plunging the room into a suffocating chill that felt alive. The lights flickered violently before fading into darkness, leaving me alone with the dead and the shadows that now prowled freely. I fumbled for my phone, the screen casting a pale glow that barely pushed back the blackness. Then I heard Ita's voice bleed clearer and closer than ever before. "You should have stopped." Fear froze me as the whisper slid across my skin like icy fingers. Then a hand, cold and heavy, gripped my shoulder. I spun around but found nothing but emptiness pressing against my back. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a message. I hesitated, then unlocked it. The screen displayed a single line: "They are watching. Tonight." A chill ran through me as I realized I was no longer alone. Whatever was hunting the dead was hunting me too. The morgue was no longer a sanctuary, but a trap. I rushed to check the drawers, my heart pounding. Each body stared back with hollow eyes, some with new bruises and marks that had not been there before. Elias Crowley's drawer was smeared with fresh blood, and the temperature around it dropped further. Desperation clawed at my mind. I had to find who was behind this, who was the watcher in the flames and the shadows. I decided to return to 2300 South Michigan, but this time I would not go alone. I reached out to a former detective, a man named Marcus Grant, who had once investigated suspicious fires in the city. I told him everything: the voices, the morgue, the fire. At first, he was skeptical, but the scrap of fabric and my haunted eyes convinced him to meet. We agreed to meet at a diner near the South Loop, the place buzzing with life, but blind to the darkness lurking just beyond the neon lights. As I left the morgue, I glanced back once more. The whispers followed me, a chorus of the dead pleading for justice, for truth, and I knew the night ahead would either bring answers or consume me completely. The diner was a faded relic of a bygone era, its neon sign flickering like a dying heartbeat against the darkening Chicago sky. Inside, the smell of coffee and grease filled the air, a sharp contrast to the cold and decay I had left behind at the morgue. Marcus Grant waited in a corner booth, his sharp eyes scanning the room with practiced vigilance. When he saw me, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. I slid into the booth opposite him, pulling the scrap of fabric from my pocket and laying it on the table. His gaze darkened as he examined the blood-stained piece, and I could see the weight of unspoken memories pressing down on him. "This isn't just a fire," he said quietly. "That place was a trap, a kill zone. People died there who were never meant to." I nodded, the voices of the dead swirling in my mind like a storm. They told me things: names, places, secrets hidden in shadows. Something worse than fire had consumed those men, something alive and hungry. Marcus leaned closer. "There are people who want the past buried," he said. "Powerful people who will stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe. They watch, they kill, and they silence anyone who gets too close. Silence anyone who gets too close." I told him about the warnings, the figures in the dark. He listened without judgment, his eyes narrowing with determination. "We need to find out what they were hiding," Marcus said. "Whatever it is, it's tied to those deaths and the others you've heard about. But be careful. You're already in their crosshairs." The diner's door jingled as a cold wind swept in. A man in a dark coat paused near the entrance, his face hidden beneath a hat pulled low. Our eyes met for a brief moment before he disappeared into the night. I shivered, a chill deeper than the autumn air creeping up my spine. Whoever he was watching us. As we left the diner, the city lights blurred into a haze of suspicion and fear. The voices in my head grew louder, a cacophony of sorrow and rage urging me onward. The dead had chosen me as their messenger, and I was running out of time. The hunt for truth was no longer just a fight for answers. It was a battle for my very soul. The night wrapped around Chicago like a velvet shroud, as Marcus and I walked the cracked sidewalks toward the burned remains of 2300 South Michigan. The city pulsed with hidden life sirens, distant voices, and the soft rustle of wind weaving through alleyways. But beneath that familiar noise lay a silence darker than the void itself. The ruins loomed before us, blackened bones of a building clawing at the sky. The fire had long been extinguished, but the air still carried the acrid sting of smoke and ash. I felt the weight of the dead pressing down, their voices tangled with the crackling whispers of the past. Marcus crouched beside the rubble, brushing away soot to reveal a twisted metal box wedged beneath a beam. Inside, charred papers and a small notebook bound in cracked leather. I reached in, fingers trembling as I pulled it free. The pages were filled with hurried scrawls and cryptic symbols, notes about meetings. Names crossed out, warnings inked in blood-red stains. One name appeared again and again, Nathaniel Crane. I looked up to find Marcus's face grim and pale. Crane was a name whispered in hushed tones among the city's oldest detectives, a man who disappeared years ago after uncovering a network of corruption tied to arson and murder. The kind of man who made enemies and vanished without a trace. Suddenly, the wind shifted and the shadows around us deepened. A low growl echoed from the darkness, and my skin prickled with primal fear. A figure stepped from the blackness, eyes glowing like embers. "You should not have come back," the voice hissed, cold and cruel. Marcus stepped forward, his hand slipping into his coat pocket, but I felt a force hold me back, a pull from the darkness itself. The figure's form twisted and shimmered, revealing not a man, but a shadow made flesh, a creature born of pain and death. Its voice reverberated in my mind, a chorus of the silenced. "We feed on fear. We thrive on silence. Your ears are cursed for listening." I clenched my fists, the dead's voices rising in defiance. The creature recoiled, snarling, as the morgue stories flooded my mind like a tidal wave. Faces, names, truths long buried. With a roar, the shadow dissolved into smoke, retreating into the night. Marcus grabbed my arm, eyes wide with shock. "What was that?" he demanded. I shook with adrenaline. Something older than death itself was guarding the secrets we sought, but I would not stop. The dead had entrusted me with their stories, and I would carry them through the darkness until the truth was finally free. The city was alive with shadows, and the battle had only just begun. The dawn broke over Chicago, pale and fragile, casting weak light over the city's scars. I sat alone in a small apartment not far from the morgue, the notebook resting heavily on the table before me. Nathaniel Crane's handwriting crawled across the pages like desperate confessions, a map of corruption, violence, and secrets buried beneath layers of fire and silence. I felt exhausted but driven. Every whispered story from the morgue pulled me deeper into this nightmare. The dead were no longer just voices. They were warnings, desperate cries from souls trapped in endless darkness. My phone buzzed. A message appeared, terse and chilling. "Stop digging or join them." The threat hung in the air like a shroud, but I could not stop. I traced the names in the notebook and discovered a pattern, a network of powerful men connected to fires, disappearances, and murder. Each death covered up, each story erased. I called Marcus. He answered immediately, his voice grave. "I found something else," he said. Surveillance footage from near the fire site. Someone was there the night Samuel Redding died. Someone watching. We agreed to meet at the morgue again that night. The air was thick with tension when I arrived. The shadows alive and watching. The voices were louder now, urgent and chaotic. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and the morgue door slammed shut behind me. I spun around, heart pounding. Marcus was there, but his eyes were different. Darker, colder. "You should have stayed away," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. Confusion and fear clashed inside me. Then the truth crashed down. The man who had promised to help was part of the darkness, part of the conspiracy that fed on silence and death. The dead whispered warnings, their voices rising into a crescendo of pain and rage. I realized I was alone, betrayed by the living, hunted by shadows, and surrounded by secrets too dark to face. But I would fight, for the voices, for the truth, even if it meant walking through the fire alone. The cold steel of the morgue pressed against my skin as I backed away from Marcus, his eyes gleaming with something not quite human. The betrayal burned hotter than any fire, but I could not let it consume me. The dead were counting on my voices, desperate to be heard, truths desperate to be set free. Marcus advanced slowly, his voice low and menacing. "You do not understand what you have unleashed. The secrets you chase will burn everything to ashes, including you." I gritted my teeth and refused to look away. The whispers around me swelled, a choir of the damned urging me forward. Faces flickered in the shadows, the men and women I had promised to remember. Their stories were my armor, their voices my strength. I lunged toward the nearest drawer, pulling it open with a force born of desperation. Elias Crowley's body lay still, but the rage in his voice erupted, filling the room. "They will not silence us. Not anymore." The air thickened as the dead rose in a tempest of sorrow and fury. The shadows recoiled, shrieking like beasts driven back by light. Marcus stumbled, the darkness unraveling from him like smoke. In that moment, I knew the truth was stronger than fear. The dead had been waiting for someone to listen, someone brave enough to stand between the silence and the screams. As dawn's first light crept through the morgue windows, the shadows retreated, and the voices softened into a peaceful hum. The battle was not over, but the tide had turned. Was no longer just a witness to death. I was its voice, and I would never stop telling their stories. Never stop telling their stories.